try it with that first before you actually dive into writing a book with dictation. It might work for you.
It does feel awkward, especially when you're very first doing it. It is a very awkward feeling to be like, I'm just talking really slowly.
Grab a big handle of bookmarks. I told myself, my goal is to give a bookmark, I had signed bookmarks to every person in this
cold
store.
traffic and converting them to warm traffic. So by the time they get to your booth, like you said, you've already got that rapport, and they're more likely to be like, how are you doing? We try to trade trinkets, or say like we have a sticker, but like, hey, you want to trade something for a sticker? And it becomes not a, hey, buy my book. It's, hey, engage with me.
Hey, folks, welcome to the BookFunnel podcast. My name is Jack. I'm our lead author support specialist here at BookFunnel. I am joined today, as always, by my co-hosts, Emma, Alisyn, and Kelli, Tanzi. And our guests today for episode 11, Jason and Leah Bond. Welcome, Jason and Leah. Good to have you guys here with us.
It's nice to be here.
It's good to be here, yeah. Thanks for inviting me.
We met, like most of our recent guests, at Author Nation in Vegas. I met with you guys, got to talk about what you guys were doing, and I thought it was really interesting. So go ahead, if whoever wants to go, just kind of introduce yourselves. Tell the audience, like, what do you guys do?
I'm the best-selling sci-fi author of the Hammerhead series. Been on the top 100 for sci-fi on Amazon, I think 3 times now, still working on some more. And she and I met 7 years ago. She's been chasing the dream of being a writer, and so, of course, we resonated there. And then she comes with a vicious, she didn't realize this, marketing background in her soul somehow. And so we worked together to try and make this happen.
Yeah. Awesome. There's a lot of husband and wife teams out there and other couples as well that I've noticed throughout the years. In fact, one of our new team members here at BookFunnel, he is the husband with tech skills of his wife, who is the self-published author. And so we see it a lot in the self-publishing industry where one spouse or partner is the writer and the other one has some other skill, whether it's marketing or tech-related skills that they can put to use to help them out. So that's great. And you guys do a lot of in-person direct sales as well, which was the big thing that kind of sparked my interest and why I wanted to bring you guys on for the podcast. And we'll get to that here in a little bit after we get through a few other things. But that to me was a really interesting thing because not a whole lot of authors usually consider that as an option for self-publishing. So we'll get into that, though. Before we go too far along, we'll get to our tips from the trenches here in a little bit. We have to take our traditional shot at Kelli. And Kelli, no, I'm okay. How has your creative process been going? I can't remember because you're working on that project. It's something that you're doing with a group of other authors, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's a collaboration of shared
That's
world
right.
where there's about 20 authors and we're sharing world, and it's a contemporary romance. And it's going pretty well. I didn't get as many words down as I wanted last week, even with dictation. So I've been, as people, if you listen to the podcast, I've been trying to do a lot more dictation, and it really does help me get some words down especially when I'm not feeling like, that after, a long day at work, and then I'm like, all right, trying to, I know
down.
that, no, right? This is awful. No, I'm just kidding. No, just trying to just get my words in and, in between dinner and stuff with the kids and everything. So, yeah, it's been going okay. I would like to have written more, and I'm going to be taking my next couple days off. That's what I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be working on writing, because that's one of my energy pennies are the highest. Is
awesome. Yeah, Emma, you I know recently. I don't want to spoil because this might be your tips from the trenches. This might be your tip, but I know you shared recently the spreadsheet. Because Kelli mentioned energy pennies.
That is going to be the tip. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to spoil it. But you had this spreadsheet that you developed. It was really neat. We'll get to that in a minute. But how's your writing been going these days, this last week or so?
I'm going to assume you all have watched the Katie Cross episode. I set up an audiobook studio in my closet, and I am now self-narrating my first audiobook, and it's going fabulously.
Okay.
So
super
that's
legit.
what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something
I'm
that
like, if she could do
we
it, I
learned
could
from
do
Katie.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was a really, it wasn't even the reason why we had her on the podcast. And it was like this interesting thing that she brought up. It's like, oh, that's really neat.
Yeah,
should-
like a throwaway thing she said, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
That's when you know, right? That somebody really knows their stuff because they just say something in passing and you're like, wait a minute. Like that's a whole conversation we could have.
Yeah.
I'm still in the middle of my outlining. I've got a ways to go, but I'm over the halfway point of all the books that I'm outlining. I'm doing a thing where I'm outlining everything that I'm going to write this year, and then I'm going to just write it. And so I'm getting all the outline done. I am a planner. I need that outline in order to get the words on the page. So that's what I've been doing lately. Jason, what about you? What's your writing schedule like? What have you been working on lately?
One of the reasons Leah and I partner is because she has this weird thing I don't have called time. So I have a varied career. I actually started in business management. I started with companies like Hewlett Packard. I got my MBA from the University of Colorado. And then I ended up working in libraries. When I was on the top 100 for sci-fi, I was actually living off my writing, but I got really lonely. So I went to work part-time at this library and I just got more hours and expanded, ended up getting my MLIS. And now I actually run the largest branch in the system. So it's been an interesting shift into that career, and I love it. That's why I stay with it, but it means I don't have a lot of time. So what I do is I'm up at 5 a.m. every morning. I sit down by 6, and I get 2 hours of writing in, and then I'm off to work. And so I have a really regimented morning, which means I need to have a really regimented evening. I figured out that if you don't go to bed on time, you can't get up at 5 a.m. too many times in a row without dying.
Sorry, that's my fault.
Yeah, usually she's like, let's watch one more episode of Adventure Time. Come on.
I'm watching Adventure Time with my kids. Oh my
It's
gosh.
good. Yeah, it's good.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I love it.
This one moment we walked, it's like talking about story. I'm very interested in story and how it impacts people. And I had no interest in Adventure Time. And I walked into the room and she and my son were watching an episode of Fiona and Cake. And it just looked like nothing. And they were both like, oh my God. And there was like tears. And I'm like, okay, I need to know what this is all about. So now I have to go from the beginning to see where that lands. And it's interesting to watch that storytelling develop with them. So yeah, that's my morning. And I set goals. I work in a Pomodoro method. I work 25 minutes at a time with a 5-minute break. I have in the morning, the first thing I do is I free write. And then I read a book on how to write. Right now I'm in the middle of Fire and Fiction by Donald Moss. Everything Donald Moss has written is pure gold, in my opinion, as far as writing. So I'll do that. And then the next 3 Pomodoros, I have a specific 500-word goal. When I'm rough drafting, if I'm editing, I just have a time goal. But I realize that if I don't set a word goal for each Pomodoro, I can kind of wander around and get lost in that time. And of course, there's days where I have to outline and plan. But when I'm rough drafting, that's my goal. So I really pretty regimented 2 hours. I try and get a little more on the weekends. So.
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. So, we have come to our first segment for today's podcast, Tips from the Trenches. In this segment, we share some self-publishing and writing-related tips with you guys. Of course, all of us here at the BookFunnel team, we happen to be self-published authors, as well as being author support specialists. So we know some stuff. We know a few things. And then, of course, we bring our guests on because they know a lot more things, right? But we do know a lot about BookFunnel. So we share some tips with you guys in order to help you guys out. So I don't know who wants to go first today. And since we have 2 guests, it might be kind of a special episode. I don't know if Leah, maybe you have a marketing tip for us, maybe? I don't know.
Well, I'm trying to think. One thing that works really well for me and Jason is for both. I'm ambiverted, but he's definitely extroverted. And so we just talk to people. And I have noticed going to a lot of cons, people will just sit there and they'll be on their phones and just kind of scroll and wait, or they'll just kind of look around but they're not engaging with people as they pass by. Yeah. And I would say the biggest thing is we do not pressure sales, we pressure conversation. And one of our little tricks is we try to trade trinkets, or say like we have a sticker and we're like, hey, do you want to trade something for a sticker? And it becomes not a, hey, buy my book. It's, hey, engage with me.
And these are at those in-person events that we're going to be talking about here, right?
Yes,
so this is a tip specifically for that. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just us engaging with people and not making it about buy my book. It's talk to me as a human being. And then a lot of the times people will just be like, well, you got me. What's your book about? And then we make a sale and it's just nice. Right. Yeah. We also meet really cool people doing this. Yeah.
That's a really good tip. I've been in settings like that before, not as an author and I have been there for BookFunnel and it's just, but in other careers as well. So it's something I've done before. And if you haven't done it before, you need a little bit of practice to get comfortable with it. And that's a good tip. That's a good way to to kind of smooth your way into, talking to folks, talking to strangers can be tough.
It can.
Exactly. Yeah. Emma, go ahead. I teased your tip already, so go ahead, and then we'll keep going from there.
Well, my strategic activator pinged off Jason, so I'm gonna save the tip I had for next week and do a new tip. That's how I roll. Okay. Because Jason mentioned
You've done
sleep.
this before.
I have. I'm very data responsive. I can't help it. But biphasic sleep. So what biphasic sleep was, it was a thing in the pre-industrial eras where humans would naturally have 2 sleep periods. So they go to bed at a normal time, then they'd get up really late, or what you consider early in the morning, and then they would do some study, prayer, some feed the chickens, and then go back to bed. Productivity. Now, I naturally wake up around 2 to 3 a.m. I'm not tired. You could be a little, but I'm not tired, and I can get in an extra hour of work. Just by taking advantage of that natural sleep cycle where, okay, I get up, I have a glass of water, I'm not like dragging. So a quick hour, even quick 30 minutes of dictation.
You're doing BookFunnel email support for our Australian users, right? Is that what you're doing at that time?
I have, and I've occasionally wondered, I wonder if they know I'm logged in right now. Like, what's Emma doing?
Yeah.
I've heard of that, waking up that early. And I know Jason sometimes wakes up and he's just sitting there lying in bed being like, why can't I sleep? But maybe you should get up and write that.
Well, I've heard about that with ancient minds, and especially during the winter time. So when the night got really long, there'd be that biphasic thing. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Kelli, what do you got for us today?
Okay, so mine is business related. A lot of authors, of course, we know this. It's kind of one of our things. We like to be creative, but maybe not business management side of things. And it's tax season. So here's your reminder. Get your tax software in order right now. Start actually tracking yourself, an hour a week or something like that. Just plan it into your day. And I use self-employed. I think it's QuickBooks Self-Employed. It's basic, I think it's like $10 a month. And it helps just to keep me, organized, because I'm not that organized when it comes to the finance stuff. So now I'm going and looking for my receipts and going back to March of last year and trying to figure out, when did I buy that cover or that sort of thing. So keep your chickens in a row now, or ducks in a row now. And get your software done now so that you can manage your 2025 books now.
I feel personally attacked by that tip.
I know. So I've previously done some other things. I used to do an eBay store, and with eBay, you're buying shipping materials and a lot of other expenses that you have and equipment, things like that. And then you're buying shipping labels and so forth. And so an app like that was absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yes. An app like what I use, an app similar to what Kelli described, is Keeper Tax, I think, is the app that I've used. I think it probably does something similar. It's able to access your bank statements and bank account, and then it categorizes your purchases, and it's really simple. And so it was like absolutely essential for something like that. And so to me, then looking at like my author business, which is so much simpler, and granted, I'm not out here, making tons of money yet from just my writing, right? BookFunnel is my main gig. But even then, it's like, man, something like that, it saves you a lot of headaches. So that's a good tip. It's a good tip. Jason.
Kelli, I'm signing on right now. There's a free trial. Thank you.
Jason, what do you have to share with us today, tip-wise?
Oh my gosh, so many thoughts. So keeping it focused with in-person sales and connection with people. And we can dig into a whole bunch of ideas about this, but one of the biggest keys is when we talk about mirror neurons, we talk about that ability to have the positive interaction with people when they meet you for the first time. If you're in a state of worrying about sales or worrying about how many books I've got to sell at this convention or whatever, if you're just having fun and you're setting your goals, and we could talk maybe a little later about like how to set goals that drive sales, but when you're just having fun, people pick up on that. They start having rapport, and that's really, really critical, because the first step in the sales process is build rapport. And a lot of people miss that. So that's a big tip, is to have fun and try and loosen up and just really enjoy yourself when you're trying to sell,
Yeah.
which seems counterintuitive, but
Right. No, I've been there, different setting, but nonetheless, when you're trying to sell anything to someone, the worst thing that you can do is to try to sell them something.
100%.
Yep.
Honestly.
There's a reason
So
people hate car salesmen.
yes. No, yeah. When you've met a good one, you know, because they're not talking to you about buying the car, they're talking to you about other stuff. And that's almost recently, unfortunately, the car itself was a bit of a lemon. That's another story. But the salespeople we dealt with, they were nice. I don't think they really knew what was up with the car, but that's another story. Anyway, my tip for today, before we wrap up this segment, very simple around dictation, because I know a lot of folks are thinking about dictation, considering dictation for all the many benefits that dictation can bring. What I have started doing and has really benefited me is I'm making a transition from, I've been a keyboard, warrior for a long time. Wrote most of my books previously on my laptop. And then I switched at some point, because I'm psychotic, to writing on my phone while I'm walking on a treadmill.
It worked.
Like on a treadmill, writing on my phone with my thumbs. Still got a pretty decent word count when I did it. People were like, how do you do that? It wasn't actually that bad once you get used to it. But now transitioning from that to now trying out dictation and trying to get the majority of my words from dictation. Do your outlines with dictation. When you're outlining, right, you might have kind of a more natural pace where you'll have an idea, so you can speak it out, and then you'll pause for a little bit, and then you'll speak the next idea, and that might help you create the cadence that you need for when you do ultimately start writing with dictation. I found that useful. So if you're wanting to try out dictation, try it out with outlining first. And I got to say, this is also, I'm kind of stealing this from Katie Cross, because she also mentioned that she does the same thing. That's where I got the idea originally from. It works, guys. If you're not sure about dictation, you're on the fence, or you just want to try it without like the commitment of, okay, I have to write a book with this brand new technique that I've never really done before. Try outlining, or just, putting ideas like world building or character building, something like that. But whatever your process is, try it with that first before you actually dive into writing a book with dictation. It might work for you.
Well, it's really important to note, too, that it does feel awkward, especially when you're very first doing it. It is a very awkward feeling to be like, I'm just talking really slowly to myself.
Yes.
Like, it's a very awkward feeling, but
I
that's
do that all
okay.
the time. So
Yeah. My kids are like, what are you doing? I'm like mumbling to myself in my office. So yeah, I mean, it does feel awkward, and that's okay. Like, embrace that, because that's the reason why most people, when they're like, nope, I can't do it. My brain just doesn't work that way. And we had Becca on from AutoCrit. She talked about how many words she was getting. I mean, she gets like 160,000 words a month using dictation, and she just blows the doors off of it. And she's like, yeah, I'm at my kid's marching band on my device, like talking into my phone, and so that sort of thing. But it does feel really awkward, but once you kind of get into the swing of it, it actually is, it's just wiring your brain to do it. That's all.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and the type of stuff that Becca is writing too,
Yeah.
because she's writing more of the racy
Steamy.
kind of stuff,
Senior
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
and she's doing it in public as like, okay, if she can
She's
do
really
it,
careful though. She did say I'm
if
pretty
she can
careful.
do it, if she can do it, I can do it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That was part of my thought too. So, so yeah. Anyway, there's my tip. That wraps up the tips from the trenches for this episode. Now let's get to our main topic. The whole reason why we have Jason and Leah here, because you guys really impressed me. We sat down
thank
for a
you.
one-on-one. I sat down for a one-on-one with a ton of authors at Author Nation, and a lot of authors who were in a lot of different places in their self-publishing career, and sat down with you guys, and you guys were you were doing things that, like, I tell people that you can aspire to do one day, and it was great. The biggest thing, obviously, and we've already mentioned it, is in-person direct sales. again, this is something not a lot of authors are either even thinking about that. Maybe it's not even something that they've thought of. And there's a lot of authors who are also like, no, I don't even want to be in front of people. Like,
It
that
can be
sounds
terrifying.
nauseating. Right.
Yeah.
And we can maybe address both of those aspects of it. But I want to start with like how you guys got into doing this. So what gave you the idea to try this? Were you doing it from the beginning? Give me kind of the origin story of how you guys got into doing these cons and so forth, or what sparked the idea.
The answer is I forced Jason into it against his will.
I love it.
Well, I used to do a few in-person events before she forced me into the cons. But
Yeah.
so there's a background. I have a background. Like you say, I have a varied background. There was a point where I was actually a car salesman. I had sales in my training. And what I learned doing car sales was that idea of how not to be the creepy car salesman and actually have fun with it. And then I took that I remember going to my first book signing at I think it was a Hastings book seller that's no longer here. And
Rest
I
in
remember,
peace.
yeah, right, seriously. But the lady who had invited me, their chief book buyer, after I was done, I didn't really think about it. I was just doing what I had learned how to do. She said, you are my model book seller. I tell other people to do what you did. And we can get into what I did at that show. But then I'll segue to Leah, how she learned how to do a booth set.
Yeah. So I, as a nerdy kid, kind of grew up in a Japanese family, and I did a lot of origami, and I wanted to figure out how to get rid of it. So I did a lot of craft shows from about 17 to 23 or so. And so it's about 5 years of learning how to set up a really attractive booth and talking to people about what I'm doing and my crafting. And I learned to look at other people's setups and see what resonated with me with, do I feel drawn in to go into that space? Is it clean and organized? Can I understand from a distance what it is? And so when I decided to force Jason into doing book sales at cons, I did so much research and looking up any kind of author book displays and kind of mimicking or improving on. And so I went for the more visualization aspect, and I made Jason do the hard work of actually writing the books and bringing them there. So, but yeah.
Yeah, because I imagine at some of the cons you guys are at, it's not just all authors everywhere.
No, yeah.
Right? It's a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And so you want to like very clearly signal book, author, right? Like how do you do that? I mean, I'm just, other than like, my first thought is just make a giant physical version of your book that's like 10 feet tall.
I make to dress a giant book outfit and he just walks around. No, I'm kidding. No.
Yeah. One of the things that really stands out to me that to make sure people know your bookseller, and I see people get this wrong a lot, and I actually learned this from Leah, so I'm stealing your tip here, Leah, is elevation. So you need your books to have different levels on your table with maybe a central spot where you can talk to people that's open, with bookshelves so people can see the books. When it's all laying flat, it's flat. So elevation is key.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great because I'm envisioning it now. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
If you're walking around, there's going to be a whole bunch of, if you're at a con or something like that, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff trying to grab your attention. And putting those levels and so forth, just like, I imagine you have, even for authors who only had a few books, if you put it on a pedestal, right, you make it's not just, some prop there on the table that you pick up. It becomes, right, something that people can see from afar. That's neat. I know we oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We even, I think our first con, we only had 2 books, and then we went on to his third. But even with 3 books, I made it so it looked welcoming and plentiful on the table, and it really drew people in. So, yes.
Yeah. So I imagine having a stack of books is probably, obviously, if you have 3 books, you don't just want to have literally 3 books there on the table. You want to have, right, like you said, to make it look plentiful. What does that look like? What goes into that to make it inviting as well?
Well, I went to, I think, Lowe's, and I got some tan crates or something, or a gray crate. And I just stacked them facing outward and just lined the books up facing out. So you're looking, and I stacked them on top of each other to create that elevation. I can't words today. And
elevation.
Thank you.
Elevation, yeah.
And people would just walk by and just basically see a bookshelf of the same books, and they could just reach in and grab one and look through it. And especially when you
Sure.
get the product in the person's hand. It what did Ben Wolf say? It creates that sense of ownership. I believe he said that.
Yeah, people
Um,
can touch it and hold it if you put
yeah.
it in their hand.
Yeah, having a booth babe also helps. That's me. I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
Not wrong. Not wrong.
Well, actually, it goes both ways. We talked to another author
Mhm.
at Author Nation who was doing in-person events too, and she writes steamy science fiction, I think.
Mhm.
And so she has male models come
I
in
saw that. That was
and
brilliant.
dress up as her character, the
Yeah.
male characters. So yeah, that's a thing for sure.
Yeah.
That's true.
You know, hey, it gets people's
Yeah.
attention. It is what it is. You know,
I'm gonna add
I'm
one
not
more
gonna judge.
thing for setups and displays. Backdrops are really important. I have talked to some people and they don't have anything behind them, and you see the people behind them and people walking through, and
Right.
having just a simple black backdrop right behind you. It's not that expensive, and it really adds a lot of central focus into what you're about. So
It frames
Right.
the space and creates legitimacy. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really important to have that. And we start off, one of the errors we're correcting now is we had a banner that was horizontal, which left blackness below it. And we're realizing now we need to do a full dress behind us with
Sure.
the
Yeah.
full imagery.
Sure. Yeah, and it sounds like these are the type of things that you kind of just like have to like cut your teeth and learn these
Yeah.
things the hard way
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
first. But obviously, you sharing it with us now, maybe
Yeah.
folks at home won't have to
I'm gonna-
struggle as much. That's great.
Yeah,
I'm
if we
gonna
could
not-
save
oh.
people a little bit of pain, that's great.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Exactly.
So again, if you go to cons, even if you're just attending a con, look around and see what catches your eye and see what inspires you and try to implement that the best you can. I'm still going to cons constantly. And I'm trying to take notes. I take pictures of people's booths and I wonder how can I incorporate that into what we're doing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. So I had a question about the product that you're bringing. So when you're going to, because I've only done like one book signing and I had no idea what to bring and
Yeah.
how much to bring. So like how much are you bringing of, say, your actual books? Do you only bring book one? Do you bring all the books? And then do you also have merch or swag or anything that you do as little giveaways? And how much do you plan? How do you decide what you're going to give away and how much you're going to bring for each con? Is there like a math problem you do, or how do you do it?
We've been learning along the way, and we just did this today. We're actually going to Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle here in 2 weeks, and so we looked at what we did last year. We had a really good convention, so we looked at our sales from last year and just want to go a little above that because we actually ran out of books on Sunday, which is a great problem to have and also a horrible problem to have because you have people walking by you could sell to. So we wanted to expand a little bit. So we look at previous sales numbers and we just kind of played with the numbers. We definitely bring all the books because I've been surprised how often people will buy the entire series. And what we'll do is we'll offer a price point, say $20 for a softback book, a trade size, a galley size paperback. But if they buy the entire book, we'll give like a $5 discount on each one. So they get a deal and we get more profit margin. So the idea is just look at how much does each book cost you versus how much you're selling for. One of the biggest pieces of advice we got was we were selling at a too low a price point. So we were told, hey, increase it. No one will even care. And
no one
we
cared.
did. And we kept selling. So
That's part of when folks are at conventions like that, part of what they're doing there is they're there to spend money in some cases as well.
Oh.
And so you have them in a different state than when they're like, in the bookstore, maybe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So having a higher, I mean, you're going to all this effort, and if you do see the value in your own creative work, you need to be able to demand the price that it deserves. So that's a very good point.
When you're in Author Alley too, if you happen to be in an Author Alley, even if you're in the regular part of the show, but specifically in Author Alley, the people walking by you are looking to connect personally with authors. They want to be there to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep jumping in because I will never stop talking unless you ask.
You're good.
Set up the display at home, do a test run before you get to the show, make sure you have everything. One thing I have learned as a craft is always have tools in your kit, most likely pliers and wire. You do not understand how many times you need that when you just don't think of it. Something tears, a little tiny extra sewing kit in case you get a rip in the tablecloth, Velcro tab tie thingies. Just think of little tools, scissors, calculator. We have a whole bunch of Sharpies we bring for signing. And on the note of extra little things to sell, we have not done that yet. We do stickers, but we hand them out as a trade. And we're working on getting little tags to sell or as a free giveaway for audiobooks, which we're just about to get done, hopefully just in time for Emerald City.
Yeah, we're actually really, this is a good plug for BookFunnel. We're really excited. I finally got an audiobook narrated. I was literally just talking to the narrator an hour ago. And we're going to be offering it for sale through the BookFunnel app and those individual codes at Emerald City. So super excited about that.
Yeah. It's, and I imagine that's probably the best way to do it in terms of your price point and profitability, because obviously the physical book, I think, is the big draw initially. But then if you can kind of upsell them and be like, well, if you you can just get the paperbacks, or you can get get them in paper and audio, and you can listen to it while you're reading along. And maybe even some folks would want to do ebook and audio and paperback and bundle that all together. So that's awesome that you guys are doing that. Thank you for the plug, of course.
Yeah.
Well, we've been really happy with it. I'm excited.
Yeah. I'm glad it's working out for you. And that's kind of the whole reason why we expanded into audiobooks. But I don't want to talk too much about BookFunnel. I want to keep the on you guys.
Yes, I'm going to ask a question for all the authors suffering from imposter syndrome. So when do you pull the trigger on your first con? And then do you have any advice about how big it should be, especially if you are like introverted?
I would say smaller the better. Me and Jason actually met at my little rinky-dink local con that's just in a hotel room. And I mean, the panels are literally in the rooms in the con. I mean, it's just small and it's more intimate, and it builds up that courage. Emerald City can be very intimidating. We went to San Diego Comic-Con for funsies, and that was extremely overwhelming. There's so many people. It's so crowded. Start small, work your way up. Talk to other people about what their experiences are. So.
Yeah, and definitely that imposter syndrome I always tell people imposter syndrome is a good thing, because it's letting you know to keep working forward. It's like, if you just think you're great, you're probably not going to get to be as good as you could. But as you start doing this, understand that it's a learning process, and some shows are going to be amazing. Some shows aren't going to go that well, and you're learning and you're going to get better too. We went to Rose City. Was it Rose City? Yeah, it was Rose City last year in Portland. And the energy of the show was just not great. And we didn't really have very good sales, but we just have to throw that off our shoulders and keep going.
Yeah.
And on that note, I imagine it's interesting, like it might vary from city to city. It might vary from like type of event. I imagine if you're going to do something small, maybe something local, there's a variety of different events, local events that you might be able to get into. What different types of, so you guys, I know you guys do a lot of cons, like so Comic Cons and other things like that. What events have you found were like consistently pretty good? They have good energy, and obviously the numbers to back that up in terms of sales. But then what type of event, if there is a type of event that's just maybe not really conducive to it, to give us some of your experience, the different type of events that you guys have done?
Well, we've mostly just done either local cons or Comic Cons. Jason, at this moment in time, has only really written military sci-fi. And outside of sci-fi fantasy or comic book conventions, there's not really a niche for that. I have talked to authors who do fantasy, for example, and they'll go to Ren fairs, and that sometimes that's their best show is Ren fairs. So try to see what you're writing and where it might fit in.
We have a friend who does very well in strip malls. Well, not strip malls, but like regular malls. He'll pay for a booth just in a mall, and usually the price point's pretty low.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he'll do really well.
Yeah, talking with a show, so we go within driving distance. That's one thing.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, because I was wondering, like, how do you get your, because when I did it, it was carry on with my luggage, and like it was like paying. Do I want to pay to like ship it there? And a lot of hotels will take things on.
Yeah,
but
that's the way to do. Yeah. A lot of the cons will have a shipping or receiving process as well for a fee. Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting to note. So we had the military sci-fi. I actually have and I wrote it a long time ago. It was a modern day paranormal thriller. And we brought a couple copies for the first time to a show. We thought, okay, let's just bring a couple copies. And they sold out in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, 10, 15 minutes.
We're bringing a
So-
lot more of
Yeah.
those this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
Mhm.
Because
So you would
I
think
know
that it wasn't something that actually was a part of your like niche, like you thought it was not going to sell because it wasn't military sci-fi, but then it went.
It's off brand, yeah. But people, and I think that I've got the cover really, really good on that one. I think that's one of the reasons it did well is it's a really solid cover, and I've got the elevator pitch for it solid. But yeah, it's you're sometimes you're surprised. Sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes you're surprised how easily things will go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
now you'd mentioned about setting goals that help you drive sales, and you talked about one of your recent events where you guys sold out, which is the dream, right? I think most folks who are considering this, like, I don't want to like go to a convention, drag all these books with me, and then not sell either anything or selling out is what everybody wants to do, right?
Yes.
Everybody wants to be a sellout.
At a certain level, yeah, at a certain level.
So, talk me through that. Like, what's that process of how do you guys do that with setting goals? Does it have to do with the venue to some extent, the size of the venue? Just let me pick your brain on it, I guess.
So this goes back to my car sales days. And what had happened was I was not doing a very good job of it. My sales manager came up to me and he said, your test drive ratio is bad. And I'm like, oh, is that important? And he's like, yeah, nobody's going to buy a car if they don't test drive it. He said, don't worry about selling the car. Get them in the car and make them drive it. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I can do that. I love riding around in cars. And my test drive ratio, I wasn't pushing for that. So I used to tell people, it's like, hey, let's take it for a drive. Let's take it for a drive. And I got a real lighthearted attitude about it because I wasn't really worrying about oh man, do I have to close this sale or not? I just wanted to go have fun driving around in cars with people. And my test drive ratio went to the highest in the store and my sales went way, way up. I wasn't a very high pressure salesman, so I didn't have like the highest ratio because some of the guys could really shove people around, but I didn't do that. But I still got really good results. So when I did my first book signing at Hastings, I was sitting at a table and there was a bookshelf in front of me and the main traffic of the store was actually on the other side of this bookshelf. So I wasn't talking to anybody. And then Sally, the book sales manager, she came by and she's like, you don't have to just stay at your table. And I remembered my car sales days and I'm like, oh, you don't have to tell me twice. So I grabbed a big handle of bookmarks and I told myself, my goal is to give a bookmark, I had signed bookmarks to every person in this store. So I walked around to people. I said, hey, I'm doing a book signing. Would you like a signed bookmark? And I think only one person turned me down. It was hilarious too because he's like, no. And then I went and sat back down again and he came over and he's like, hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't know who you were. I'll buy a book. He actually bought a book from me after turning me down for a bookmark. When we set goals, when we're dealing with the sales process, the goal is something you can control. And you cannot control how many people will actually spend money with you, but you can actually control trying to give out a bookmark to as many people as possible or by giving out all of your giveaways. And what we've figured out how to do in building rapport with people, like that whole idea of how people walk past you, we can get into that as well. But that's what it's really, I don't know. That's one of the keys of the in-person sales.
Yeah. Yeah. So I imagine it's that in-person like connection with you to some degree.
Yeah.
What's the secret sauce on that bookmark though that you're handing out, or the sticker, right? I imagine there's something there too that's important. Yeah,
critically important. And I remember I told Leah about this, and she's like, I'm going to sell you out a little bit. She's like, that doesn't matter. And now she's like, you were right. So I get to call the husbands. I was right for once. But I knew it from previous experience. What?
You're mostly right all the time.
Mostly right. Well, mostly right some of the time. So what happens is, think about getting handed something, especially at a con, it doesn't matter. It has low value. And one of the things we have to do is increase the value of the interaction. So what we figured out to do, it was an idea I had and we applied it and it became the most fun thing in the world. And it generates so much rapport and conversation is people will walk by and will say, well, hold up. We have a little business card that's actually a summary of the book that's folded in half. So it looks like a little book. And we'll say like, hey, will you trade me for something for this little book? And they're like, what do you mean? So we're not giving it to them. We're like, hey, you have to give me something. And then we'll literally trade anything. We tell them it's a game we're playing at conventions to entertain ourselves. We have a basket and we'll show them the basket of all the stuff we've traded for these books. And they'll immediately start digging through their pockets. We've had people actually give us like $1 for a business card.
Yeah.
Hey.
Leah got offered a cigarette twice. Like I think she's had 2 or 3 cigarettes offered to her. Nicotine patches, edibles.
I
stuff.
literally got weed at con.
we'll tell people, we'll take pocket lint, like literally anything, because
Yeah.
all we're doing is establishing that rapport. And when we trade with them, it has a higher value, and people will take it, and you watch them inspect it more carefully. And then if they don't have anything they trade, they're like, oh, I don't have anything. We'll say, well, will you suffer a terrible joke for it? And then we have a whole list of dad jokes we tell that grown people pretty hard. But we've literally seen people walking behind the person we're talking to. And when we mention trading for a joke, their brakes will come on and they'll wrap around. Yep. So that's our entire connection point in building rapport, is we just have fun with that moment of trading, talking to people. We want to hear their stories. We want to joke with them. They'll trade us jokes. And it's great because the person who doesn't want to hear a joke, they're probably not going to buy a book anyway. But we've had so many people have a rapport with us, and then they leave. We'll tell them about the book, they'll leave, and then the next day they'll come back and buy a book.
Yeah. Do I have to do this sober?
No,
You
you
don't.
don't.
No.
You don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be telling jokes or trading, just something to engage and talking to people that's low pressure. So it's not about the sales. It's about getting a person to talk to you, ask them about their day or something.
So
There is that element of reciprocity, though, to some degree. You're, like you said, to trade something that implies that it has some value to it.
Yeah.
And then them suffering through the joke. And if the joke is funny or even makes them laugh a little bit, like, well, you made me laugh, so I owe you at least my time.
I use the word suffer very intentionally. Like, I want you this joke is. I will get people just like, it's just great.
So you're basically taking cold traffic and converting them to warm traffic. So by the time they get to your booth, like you said, you've already got that rapport, and they're more likely to be like, how are you doing? And they'll come on by.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. That idea of taking cold traffic and turning warm traffic is critical at conventions because people are walking by 1,000 booths. They're getting talked to by a bunch of people. And so here's the biggest secret to what I've learned about it. When I actually learned it when I was selling cars, was you don't necessarily have to push your product. You push your rapport, you push your interaction. Just have fun talking to people because people are there. They like it, meeting creators. They're there to spend money. And when you give them a personal connection, the odds of them spending their money with you they skyrocket.
Yeah, absolutely. We've made a lot of friends at cons. And when we go back, they're like, you have to be there. I want to see you. I want to catch up. How are you doing? But I've had a lady, we just vibed the whole con. And I'm like, yeah, I really want this poster at this other booth I saw, but it's $40 and I can't afford it. And she's like, well, how much are your books? I'm like, this much. And she's like, I'm going to buy a set of books just so you can buy that poster. And now it's hanging up in my bathroom. So. So
that's good.
And she just did it because we got very chummy over the whole weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not something you can really do selling your books just on Amazon.
Yeah.
You know?
When this is the most important thing, this is the core of it for independent writers. And the core is, and being a librarian, I'm aware of this when we do reader's advisory. Someone comes in and says, I need a new book to read. And it's like, oh, cool. What do you like? So we have this whole process as librarians on reader's advisory, how we learn what people like, and then we recommend new books for them. And the most people buy books for two reasons. They either know the author already, or someone they trust has recommended the author. That's part of the librarian's role in reader's advisory. Those two key points are really, really important for the independent writer because they're not going to know you. But if they can get to know you, you're the one that's trusted in recommending the book. And people love having that personal connection with an author. So the more we have that rapport, the more you're driving into that, I already know the author and I'm being recommended by someone I trust. You're getting both sides of it. It's a really great system.
Yeah.
Can I bump off of that, Jay?
No, you're not allowed. Go ahead.
So one thing we'll do is when we go to these cons, we will talk with other authors and we'll kind of get to know them. And we run into people all over the place. And so when we have people come and they're like, nah, I'm not really into sci-fi, I'm not really into military. I'm like, oh, well, if you like fantasy, you need to go talk to these people down the way. We were talking to them. Their book sounds great. If they're not your audience, help your other authors. And then guess what? Your other authors are going to send people your way when they run into people who like what you write. It's all about the connection.
Yeah, it's fun.
That answered the next question I was going to ask. Do you ever buddy up with other authors to be like, okay, after I sell my book, I'm going to send them to you and vice versa?
Yeah, we trade very often. We have one of Matt Dinneman's first books before he really, really blew up.
He was starting to get big. It was 2 years ago we met Matt and we traded him for one of his books. And
my question actually had to do with the elevator pitch, because you said not just, the jokes, and then now that you've warmed them up, like how do you just come up with what you describe your book or how you get them Now that they're warm, what do you say to them next?
But this is critical, and it's the power of yes. And this is actually, again, something I learned in my sales background. I remember the very first time I saw it was really strange. And it was one of the finance managers, was a finance manager or sales manager? One of the guys, he's like, hey, I need you to understand this. When you can get somebody to say yes, the odds of them saying yes again go up. And it's kind of the power of consent when you're dealing with relationships. It's like, hey, can I sell you more? Can I talk to you more? If you don't get the yes, you're not really in a space where they're truly hearing you. And there was a guy who came in to buy a car, and he's like, that car's too pricey. I'm not going to buy it. It was a used car, so the price was flexible. And he's like, there's no way I'm buying a car today. And then the guy said to me, and he'd already told me, he took me away. That's right. He took me away and he said, hey, I want to show you this. And he brought me back and he said, hey, would you buy the car for $1? And the guy was like, yeah, of course I would. I would absolutely buy the car for $1. He's like, okay, so you have a price. What can we get to the price? And he actually negotiated him to it was actually a really good price on the car. The guy was really happy. He bought the car. But he told us he wasn't buying a car today, and all he did was get him to say yes about something. So we don't have to be too toxic about that. We can be very positive about that. When someone says, hey, do you like science fiction? That should be the next thing is, hey, that was really a fun joke. Everything is good conversation. Do you like sci-fi? No, I'm not really into sci-fi. Oh, do you like fantasy? Yeah, absolutely. Right down there, 2 books, two booths down is a fantasy author that's really good. And when you send someone away to someone else, the pressure comes off so much. We've actually sold books to those people because they feel great about the lack of pressure.
Yeah.
But when they say yes, then it's like, can I tell you about my books? I always ask for the consent. I always have them tell me yes. And because if they're like, I'm busy, cool. That person wasn't going to buy a book anyway. I want to get that yes. But it's also very important psychology of them saying yes because they're opening the door to you and they're wildly more open to what you're about to tell them. It's really important.
I'm going to add on that short and actual, like talking about the book. I've gone to cons where I'm passing by, I'm doing my research, and a guy pulls me over. And sometimes I'll actually like stop and talk to other authors to me about his book, and talks to me about his book, and keeps talking to me about his book and all the details, opening the book, showing me stuff. And I'm just like I gotta go. It was like a 5-minute conversation about trying to make one sale. And so what our pitch is 30, not even.
You have to have the pitch totally down to one elevator ride, and it has to have a hook in it that's just like a first page hook that gets people. Well, now I have to know. And I've had many people when I hit my elevator pitch, and I can give it to you if you want, but it's like you hit this point where like, man, I have to know. You want to hear the elevator pitch?
Wait, hold up your book while you're doing it.
I was going to say, we need you to do it to demonstrate here.
Oh, wait, I got to start off because we got to do the pun because that's the whole point. What kind of pants does a psychic wear?
Okay.
A paranormal pants. There you
That's
go.
the level of jokes we're telling. That's the level of jokes we're telling. Okay. Grounds. A lot of positive things. So then we'll say, it's like, hey, do you like sci-fi? Yeah, I like sci-fi. And it's like, can I tell you about my book? And they're like, sure, absolutely. And I'll say, well, I've got the Hammerhead series. This is the first book, and I'll hand the book to them so that they can hold it while I talk to them because I want them to start kind of psychologically taking ownership of it. And I'll say, well, imagine freighters in space. They're owned by corporations, and once they're used up and they're old, the companies don't want to spend money on fuel to get them out of orbit, but they have to clear orbit. So they autopilot them down and crash land them in the Nevada desert. Then there's an old guy. His job is to recycle these freighters. So he goes on a big mechanized suit called a gorilla, and he tears them apart and recycles them. Well, one of these freighters crashes, and he goes out, rips open the bridge, and these are autopiloted, and he finds bodies on board. So he gets out of his gorilla, goes on the bridge to try and figure out what's going on with these bodies, and one of the bodies grabs his ankle because she's not dead. That's the whole pitch.
Oh, and
so
you
it's like,
ended on a cliffhanger.
Oh, yeah.
That's
There's
the
cliffy.
There you go. That's it. No, that's very effective, and it's a slightly different. Like you're delivering it more conversationally, and I don't know if that's necessarily intentional. Because if you're writing a blurb for a book or something like that, which could be compared to something like this, you might make different choices of your verbiage. I'm going to plug actually our BookFunnel blurb reviews here on the YouTube channel. Everybody go watch those after you're done watching the podcast. But it's a more conversation, like imagine this, and you're going from one step to the next and in a very casual conversational way. I think that seems very effective.
I think that's
it
actually
would be too rigid otherwise.
Yeah, well, I think that's what's on the actual back of your book is actually smaller, but it's basically that story of what you just told.
But the words are different. Yeah, it's much more dramatic. It's like in a world.
In a world.
Yes, it's a movie trailer with a deep gravelly voice. You know, exactly. Right. Whereas if you try to do that in person with somebody,
Mhm.
it would come off as, or to do a more stereotypical, maybe let's say elevator pitch.
Mhm.
Like, I got a pitch for you here, but that would come off as gimmicky.
Do you ever customize it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
when
there's
you
not much.
for the person you're talking to? I mean, because an older guy versus a younger guy or that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things. If someone has a military insignia, I will let them know that veterans are one of the reasons that I became a bestseller. Is veterans were recommending it because military sci-fi often has this puff chest bravado, and vets email me all the time saying I really got the attitudes they feel about war correct, about the exhaustion and sense of duty. They don't want to, but they will.
Mhm.
And that's will ignite with that. If it's a woman I'm talking to, I'll let them know that my mother used to be a professional pilot, so the flight scenes are informed by all the time I spent in small planes, and that I write really strong female characters. I get complimented all the time by women on the female heroines I've written. So I'll do those little adjustments. Usually it'll come after, like that'll be kind of an add-on. I'll do the regular pitch, and then I'll just immediately add that on for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any you found are more convert more than others, or is it just all over the place?
I think that the vets often will convert pretty readily. If they're a sci-fi fan, they like military sci-fi, I can almost always sell them a book based on those things.
Yeah.
If women are sci-fi fans and I let them know about how I've written female characters, and I think Leah legitimizes me because I'm not just a dude claiming that,
Mhm.
that'll lock in a lot of times too, because a lot of times when we read stuff, like vets will read stuff that's not accurate. Women will read stuff that doesn't reflect the complexity of women's experience. And so people want that.
I will tell people if they're like, nah, I'm not really into sci-fi. I always tell them, and sincerely, I do not really care for sci-fi. I am epic fantasy all the way. I'm all about magic systems and world building. I had to edit the first two. Sorry, I had to read the first two to edit the third one. And I actually really like it. Like the way he wrote it got me to love it. And it's the only sci-fi story I really like. I will actually bring that to the surface.
Well, let's
Yeah,
talk
well,
a minute. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, well, I was going to say, you mentioned the Nevada desert. So it's sci-fi, but it's still grounded in the real world. Whereas, some people might they think sci-fi and you're talking about aliens and a whole bunch of other words that I don't even know. So you might even get some of the people who like sci-fi maybe isn't their usual cup of tea.
Absolutely.
But you've got the military angle there, a number of different things that I think you could still get people to relate to, even though the story is sci-fi at its core.
Yeah, it's there. So real quickly, let's talk about the sales process. So the sales process, when you're talking about sales in general, is establish rapport. So you go up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Jason. You are cool. What do you like? You like football? Let's talk a little about football. Whatever it is you're talking about." It's like, I'm not a football fan, so I'd be lost. It's like, can we talk hockey instead? But you establish rapport, and then you establish need. So the idea is this person standing in front of you, if they're stopped and talk, do they like sci-fi? So that's actually a very intentional next question is, do you like sci-fi? Because it's kind of like if I'm only selling minivans and someone comes up to me and says, "Okay, let's talk. I've established rapport. What do you need?" It's like, I need a Porsche. I need a 2-seat Porsche that I can rip around corners. It's like, I can't help you. You need to go down to the Porsche dealership. So we want to establish need. And then once you've established need, you've got rapport, you've got need, then you display the product. And then you close the sale. Those are the 4 steps of sales. So when we're asking to like sci-fi, and then like you talked about, Emma, you were talking about modifying the message to meet their needs. And the biggest thing I want people to get in their heads when they're trying to do sales, even if they're online or if they're talking to someone or in person, is take heart. People need good story. They need it. They don't just want it. The human psyche needs great story, and you are offering them something that they need.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's hard for authors to put into words. This is actually something that I've talked about, which is the needs of readers and what readers need, like what their pain points are. Like pain points is kind of a marketing term for like, what is the product? What is the problem that the product is solving? And it's really easy when the product is like, dish detergent or gas for your car or, food. You're hungry, right?
Yeah.
But there's something that's maybe a little less tangible for fiction in particular. Nonfiction doesn't have this problem as much because usually nonfiction is to solve a problem. But fiction tends to have this problem a little bit more, which is how do I communicate the need that's being satisfied. And I think that, and maybe you can relate this to some of your characters. I think it's usually the characters, and it's getting them to connect with the character, getting them to, and that character usually has to go through some stuff.
Yeah.
Right? To become a sympathetic, likable character. And what that really means is that there's something about the character that the reader is connecting to, and there's some kind of healing going on there, or at the very least, like internal, like introspection, right? Is my thought. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but to me, that's where it is.
When you look at the elements of the elevator pitch I have, it's got those elements of a guy who's going to save someone. It's like, and that's the hero. And then there's questions raised. It's like, well, why is that person there? What is going to happen with them? But you have that little hint that there's a heroic moment, because a true hero acts selfishly. Super selfish. No, they act selflessly. So you have that little hint that there might be some selfless action there and some danger that's going to happen. It's really important for people to feel that, because we all want to feel like maybe we've got a little selfless hero in ourselves.
Yeah. I know another thing that's come up with multiple conversations that we've had. The part of little breaking of the fourth wall here for a moment. I've found we do these podcasts, and I've learned so much from all the guests that we've had. It feels like I'm getting this like crash course from all these different authors, and it's funny how you can connect so many things together. We had Kate Hall on one of our earlier episodes on the podcast talking about TikTok for authors. Big thing was on TikTok, you're posting hooks. You have to hook people with your book, and you hook them with some emotional scene that usually communicates this idea of loneliness. We had Mal Cooper on, and I think the topic came up of like, you want readers to be, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but like offended on behalf of the character, the main character, at what they've been put through, about what they've been forced to endure, so that because everybody kind of sees themselves as the main character a little bit. And to connect that back to that's the job that you have to do. Hopefully you do it from the very beginning, right? And you've written all that stuff in there. You have part of learning how to tell a good story. But sometimes it's hard to know if you've written something to go in and pluck those things out. I imagine you made those decisions intentionally, and you knew what those hooks were going to be when you wrote those books.
Was that a good point?
Plan? Or was that something you kind of discovered, you maybe reverse engineered a little bit?
It was. So the original Hammerhead came out a long time ago, 2011. I think I pushed out the first book, and then there was a lot of things. But it was a process of telling people about the book and realizing that they would just had this flat look in their eyes. And then I told them something else. I tried something else. I talked to, and there were people I knew. It's like, oh, tell me about your book. And I tell them. And then one time I told them the way I just told you, and they were just like, oh my God, I have to read that book now. And it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, so it was a little trial and error. And I think you have to do that. And I think it's a great idea when you're talking about your book to go get several friends and say, okay, I'm going to tell you about this book, and then have them honestly tear you apart. I mean, be nice about it, but be like, does that seem exciting or boring? I really need to know. It's like, well, it's a little boring or whatever. And then try a different way, because people will tell you when you hit that place where it's like, oh, I really need to know.
Yeah. Well, and even if you don't do in-person events like this, somebody eventually is going to ask you what your book's about. And you need to be able to have an answer for that. But folks who are skeptical about it, I understand they're skeptical about doing in-person events. But what would you say, like, there's going to be some objections, right? One of those objections is, I'm an introvert. I can't do in-person events. Another is probably going to be, there's a cost associated with it, and I want it to be profitable, and I want to make sure that I recoup, my investment essentially. And then I think those were probably the main two. And then the third one is time. So to each of those objections, right? I'm an introvert. I can't talk to people. It's all about the money, and I'm not going to sell the books, this, that, and the other. And then the time aspect of it. What would you tell somebody who's giving either of those objections? Maybe it's the one thing that's keeping them from giving it a shot. What would you say to them? I laid out a lot there on the plates.
I will jokingly say to the introverts, get your designated extrovert and bring him with you, because all the introverts have a designated extrovert. But realistically, I don't know, because because I thrive off of talking to people, I know a lot of people who do go are very introverted and they're very quiet and shut down. I don't know. What do you think, Jason?
It gets really difficult sometimes to step
Yeah.
into those spaces because one of the things that we're worried about is we don't want to be creepy. We don't want to pressure people. We don't want to bother people the way we've been bothered in the past. And we also don't want to be rejected. Nobody wants to be rejected because it hurts to be rejected. And one of the things that we have to really have in our head is we are there to talk to the people that want to talk to us. And as people walk by and you say, hi, how are you doing today? Hi, how are you doing today? Whatever process is yours, because not everybody's going to use our process. Obviously, you're going to find your own process and it has to be yours. Otherwise, it's going to feel wooden. But you're going to get rejected. You're going to get rejected. But then when you meet that one person who's really excited about your book, it can really fill the tank having that person talking to you straight across the way. And when you turn it into more of a, if I were to say to you, hey, go in that room and have a conversation with somebody about what they like to read, you could do that.
Yeah.
That's easy. I mean, maybe it's not easy to have the initial conversation, but that's really all you're doing is like, what do you like to read? And then sincerely being interested in what they say and what they have to do. And then if they ask about your books, you don't even have to ask for the sale. You don't even have to ask the pressure. You can just have a conversation with them about what they love about reading and tell them you really want to know, like, what do you really love about reading? You find your own way into this space and you will have shows you go to that you lose money. You will have shows where you come away with some money.
Right.
So the less expensive the show, sometimes you can get invited at a space where it doesn't cost you anything to show up. And then every book you sell is, a profit. You have to drive, you have to do these things.
Right.
Fundamentally, it is a way to talk to people that you never would have met. And every person that you don't talk to who walks by your booth is a potential friend. It's a potential someone you could have had a big impact on their life.
I'm going to chime in and say it took bravery to write a book because writing a book is really hard.
That's a good point.
It takes bravery to go to a show and to talk to people. And Jason's helped me with this a bit because I can be very introverted at times. Ask people about themselves. Ask questions. If you don't know what to say, ask something. But yeah, we don't always make a profit when we go to cons with the hotel and the cost to go and buying the books and everything. Most of the time we actually go away not making enough money to warrant being there, but it's all about the connection with the people. And that's why you're there, is to find people who want to read what you wrote. And if you wrote a book, it means you were meant to, and someone out there is going to love it, because otherwise.
And if you let the people who are going to hate it stop you, you'll never find the people who love it. So really quick jump off. I'm actually listening to a book by Jim Murphy called Inner Excellence. I found, and I've been listening to it. It's excellent. Inner Excellence, it's excellent. But he was a baseball player for the Chicago Cubs, and he talks about how he was kind of going the wrong direction with his success until he realized that his whole purpose for success that would lead to real fulfillment was to become the best version of himself that he could possibly become. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about beating other people. It wasn't about winning a pennant. It was all about challenging himself and becoming the biggest version of himself. So, and this is the critical part, so that in that stronger version of himself, he could help other people become their strongest version. So if you're a really, really big introvert and you want to take on this challenge, you're thinking about doing in-person sales, there's part of you that's wanting to take on this personal challenge. You step into this space, you will learn, you will grow, you'll become a bigger, stronger version of yourself. And then maybe years from now, you'll run into an introvert that you can help take that path too. And when we have that version of success, it really helps energize us.
Yeah. No, that's a good outlook, I think, to have with anything, but your author career in general, the time aspect of the whole thing, because it's a commitment.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
What speak to that for me here? What's the lifestyle like? It's a lot of weekends.
Yes.
I imagine.
I love it. I thrive off of it. We have done shows where we're there for 8 hours straight and I'm talking to people for 8 hours straight. And then they're like, hey, we're closing. And I'm like, wait, we're closing? I don't want to be closed. I don't want to be done. I love this. He will literally have to grab me by my shoulders and sit me down to eat food and drink water because I am just so energized, because it's so much fun with the cosplays and the people and talking and the jokes. And I make time for it to the point where Jason's like, we need to slow down. I'm like, oh, all right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Jason?
I think one thing is to try not to let it, if you're going to try it out, it will interrupt your writing process. So you have to balance that out. Is if you were to do a show every weekend, you could meet tons of writers, you could meet tons of readers, all these other things. It's gonna be really hard to maintain a good, solid writing practice. So you really have to balance it out and, try it out, see if it's for you and do it a little bit, maybe 1 year. I think we kind of built into it. We did 9 last year more. It was like once a month we were going to a show.
Yeah.
And we built up to that. There was like 2 shows 1 year, then 3, and then,
Yeah.
Sure.
And again, I forced Jason. I'm like, I signed you up for this con, this con, this con, and this con. He's like, what? And I'm like, sorry, you got to take the time off now.
There we go.
Right. So once a month obviously that's something that you built up to.
Yeah.
But it's not this grueling, like every weekend, you work 5 days out of the week and then you're spending every weekend selling books at some convention. You get some breathers. You get the chance to step back from it. It is still a commitment, but it sounds like it's energizing at the same time.
Yeah.
Jason, I want to connect what you said there back to something you said earlier about your routine and your routine of, you said you get up at 5 a.m. You got about 2 hours that you spend writing. Yeah, like you said, cons are and going to events and things like that are going to disrupt your writing process. What are some of the things that for the authors who are wanting to develop maybe a more regimented routine, like what you're talking about? We're changing topics here a little bit. What would you say? What tips do you have for them, or some advice from your own experience of developing your routine?
Well, and this is the thing is a lot of what becomes becoming a professional writer. And if we're independent, we're still becoming professional writers. One of the things that's about becoming a professional writer is just learning how you write and how you write each novel. And one of the ways I've discovered I write is I need to have a goal every day, because then I feel once I've met that goal, I get my dopamine, I get my positive feels off that. So when I have got my 2 hours in, I feel good. And I've noticed even when I go to work and I have to have somebody who's got a drug problem leave the library and it's a stressful day, nothing can really bother me that day because I got my writing in. But the other side of that is as you're developing your process and I miss my goal. So suppose I slept in, I forgot to set my alarm, or I only get 30 minutes in because something interrupted me, like I got a sick call, now I've got to try and find a substitute. Whatever comes up, the thing that we don't do well often, especially as writers, because we can be internally critical, is we don't give ourselves the kindness of saying, okay, cool, today didn't work out. Tomorrow is the next day. Let's just let it go and we'll just try again tomorrow and try again tomorrow. And so when just this weekend we went to our local convention, it tore up my writing time. I got 30 minutes in one day. I didn't get any the next day because it was a late night and then an early morning. And I just told myself, and actually this is an area I'm actually directly working on right now, is the kindness of like, okay, that's totally fine. Today we're going to get back into our 2 hours. We'll get back up on time and we'll roll back in. And the more kindness you have, the more to yourself, the more you're going to be able to roll back in quickly.
Yeah. And I can relate to that.
Yeah, I think
shockingly
we all can,
well.
Yeah.
Right. So are you writing? Do you have in your routine in your schedule to write all 7 days a week? Do you write every day? Do you have planned time where you aren't writing? What's that look like?
She always wants me to take a day off or take planned time down. I do need to figure that out. But because
I'm gonna interrupt you. You need to plan time to relax, because if not, you will get the burnout. And this one, I don't know if he's that way with you guys. He does not relax, and then he gets a burnout, and then he's like, I never get days off, and I'm so stressed out. And I'm like, dude, sit down for like 3 hours on like a Sunday and just do nothing. Go ahead.
Jason, how does that make you feel?
No. Yeah, I need to
I
do
feel
that
like
better.
I'm a therapist in the room here.
Like,
I'm teasing, but go
when I
ahead.
grew up, yeah, it's important to have downtime, and it doesn't have to be a whole day. It can be 1 hour where you're going to sit down and play a video game or go for a walk, and you're just going to stop for a minute.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember, gosh, I was in my late 20s, and the feeling of sitting down to play a video game, something that, even a few years before then, really was before I had kids. Right before I had kids, sitting down and play a video game, wasting an entire afternoon, it's like, oh yeah, no problem. Then I had kids, and it was like, oh, but if I sit down to play the video game, then that's time that I'm spending doing that, and like you have to wind up scheduling it. It's just the most bizarre thing. If I told myself, in my early 20s that, yeah, you're going to schedule, time to play video games. What are you talking about? That's just ridiculous. But no, it's true. You get you have a change in mindsets for different people for different reasons. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it is you have kids, family, whatever it happens to be. For me, it was kids. And it changes your mindset, and you have to put on your own mask first.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that.
It's a
I
good
say that
analogy.
thing all the time. You know?
Yeah.
That very thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Emma, I think you did have a question though about like startup costs. Go ahead.
Yeah, because you kind of mentioned a few things like strategic wants to know numbers, like the banner, the tablecloth, your little toolkit. But if you're on a budget and you're just starting out, like what are the startup costs, the things you must have versus nice to haves?
One of the things that we started with were these, and it's just foam core, and we got this printed at where did you get these printed, Leah?
Kinko's, FedEx, whatever it's called nowadays.
Yeah, so we got this printed. We used spray adhesive to put these on. We cut them out, and then it just becomes kind of a more visual thing. You can literally make some signage like this for a very low price point, and as long as you've got something that's big and dynamic like this, you could set this up on a tabletop. And even if you didn't have a background, at least this is going to be a big thing that'll pull people in, and then have a small stock of books that you can sell. So and start from there, and then like add a piece and add a piece. We've kind of done that ourselves, as we've added a piece here and there.
Actually those foam core signs, they're wonderful, but after about 1 or 2 cons, if I drop them wrong or if just they get something dropped on them, they bend and break. And so we're going to upgrade now that we can afford to. But yeah, it started off as just a single banner with no backdrop and a couple of the things here and there, and just kind of establish what is the most important, and what can you leave out for the next time. So obviously books are the most important thing. A banner that says your name and what you're selling is important. Tablecloths, because sometimes they don't provide those for you. So yeah, just kind of piece together what you can.
You can get into one of those stretch banners that's like 6 feet tall by about 3 feet wide. For $150 or something. And that would be a good next point, is to say, okay, I've got my little signs. I would say at a starting point, the things that are critical are a nice tablecloth, because you never know if they're going to have it or not. And you don't want a plastic table. So if you have a black tablecloth, and then you have something to elevate your books, even if it's a cardboard box, so you can put a piece of fabric over. So it shouldn't cost you anything but the piece of fabric and a cardboard box to put things on top of. And those signs, like something that shows your book at a larger scale, those 3 things is a great starting point. Then maybe the next thing would be one of those pull-up banners to stand behind you. Is just another starting point, and you can just roll in. If you have a local bookstore that will allow you to do a book signing, that's a great place to come in. Sometimes they'll take a cut of every book you sell, which can really cut into your profits, but you're not paying for a booth.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in thrift stores, because you can buy interesting things pretty cheaply. Stuff that you can modify, or just redesign or create. I also just love thrift shopping, and people need to do it more often. But yeah, as a crafter, when I was doing my craft shows, I would go to thrift stores and I would get the weirdest stuff, and then I would figure out how to put it in my booth and my display, and it worked wonders. So
I had a question about the follow-up that you have now that you've created those relationships with people. Do you have like a way of getting them onto a mailing list? Do you have a special mailing list specifically for people you've met at cons? And then how do you follow up? Do you continue to follow up with them afterwards?
This is actually an area we're weak in, and it's really a new priority of mine, is to have a sign up space where you say, hey, you can sign up for my stuff, because like this whole direct sales model, if you capture somebody, the whole point of going in person, especially if it's hard for you, is to gather people that will be your customers later. Because the idea is, so I often talk about being an independent writer as owning Jason's hamburger stand. So the idea is, if I have $1 million, I can buy into a franchise and I'm going to make money right away, because people will drive by, they'll see the franchise, they'll know that franchise. Like we talk about, they know the author, or they know someone's recommended it, and they'll come in and buy a hamburger from me. But if I don't want to pay that fee up front, or I don't have it, I can open Jason's hamburger stand, but I really need to have extremely good hamburgers, i.e. stories. And I need to have repeat customers. So I need to have that person eats that really good hamburger. They go out and tell their friend, and then I get 2 customers the next day, and then 3 customers the next day. So capturing those people's information and then interacting with them, which is a whole nother deep dive on how to handle that emailing list. But capturing that information, it shows us something we're not doing effectively and we need to do. So if you're starting out, jump on that right away. Ask people to sign up. And also always, and this is definitely the last part in the sales process, always ask for the referral. Tell them it's like, hey, I'm an independent writer. If you really like my books, please, please, please tell other people about it. It's really critical. Word of mouth is critical for me. People will do it.
Yeah.
They become your salespeople.
Yeah. I'm going to add in onto that. Email lists and keeping in touch with people and even posting on social media have been I'm going to take ownership, my weakest points. And I need to get better about that. I need to, I'm also learning from scratch. So I'm trying to figure out who's the best email lead person, how to write emails. Do I write it in my voice or Jason's voice? I'm remembering to take photos at events and then posting them. That's one of my biggest problems. I will listen to a podcast called the Self-Publishing Podcast. And it's more about like nonfiction books to like do like speaking events. But the thing I've pulled away from that the most is email lists are top dog compared to any other means of staying in touch with people.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, TikTok almost got banned. Instagram could not be reliable. Facebook, people might just not go on there anymore for whatever reason.
Or you could get deplatformed yourself.
Or you could get deplatformed, yes. Email lists are king when it comes to gathering your people to you. So, yeah.
Yeah. From the BookFunnel side of things, just so everybody watching knows, like if you are doing something like this in person, BookFunnel has some tools for you. There's BookFunnel print codes. In this case, to build a newsletter, you would use these for a free book that you're giving away. It's an optional sign up. People can get your reader magnet, for example, right? So if you're handing away your little mini books and has a code inside it, and they can get the free reader magnet. That's an optional way to do it, or you can just use a BookFunnel email collection page. And I don't know, maybe that's a good fit for you guys because you were talking about the value that you're providing them. It's a good way to be like, hey, here's this free book. You just got to sign up for my mailing list. You're giving them something in exchange for it. There's that value proposition there.
Yeah.
This is a really important thing. I'm glad you brought up. It was a lesson learned. Luckily, we learned it really fast. And we were using the codes from BookFunnel. And the idea was we were trying to develop the rapport. So we went through a rapport process. And then we'd say, oh, and here I have a reader magnet. It's a free ebook through BookFunnel. I'd explain what BookFunnel was. And I'd hand it to them. And they'd be like, cool, thanks. And they'd leave. And it was like, oh, our sales, it was like one day, couple hours, the sale just tanked. And we're like, oh, wait, we're developing a transaction. And by giving that to them right away, we're killing the transaction because they've received the transaction. So what we started to do is we started to use that. Once we realized I would always give it to them if they purchase, be like, oh, by the way, here's a bonus. And people like that.
Exactly.
But if they were going to walk away, I like sci-fi. I don't really want to buy right now. Cool. Here's a sample for you to try. We would use it as kind of a last ditch effort to hook them. And it worked. So
yeah. Exactly. Awesome. So we are going to transition now to our final segment. As much as I would like to continue on this topic, it's been great. We'll just have to have you guys on again in the near future and talk about it again. It'll be great. But we're now to our story behind the story segment where we talk about our guests, their creative endeavors, what they're currently working on. Jason, you write military sci-fi. You're speaking my language. As you can see, I have some artwork from some of my book covers here behind me in case you can't see them.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're in the same sort of genre. What inspired you to write the Hammerhead series? What's the inspiration behind it?
Absolutely. So I've been a sci-fi fan since I started reading. I just remember I remember going to Powell's bookstore in Portland, buying I've saved up my money and I bought every Arthur C. Clarke book I could get. I love the old school sci-fi, and I actually didn't know military sci-fi. I didn't really identify that what I was writing was military sci-fi. What I had done when I wrote my first book was I took a short story and I flipped the ending of it. So in the end of that whole setup, he actually turns the woman over, to the people that come hunting for her. And then he goes home to his wife, is like, yeah, I think I made a mistake today. And it was kind of a tragic short story. And when I thought, I really want to dig into my first book for real, I want to jump in on this, I'm like, hey, let's take that short story and flip the ending and see what happens, because I wanted a short time span with a small cast that was super high action, just so it was less for me to mess up. And it happened to have that militarized background. And then people started emailing, like, oh, what happens next? What's the sequel going to be? And because it had hit the bestseller, so I started getting emails from people. And I was like, I never planned a sequel. So I started writing a sequel to it. And that one, fortunately, has done well, as has the third. So I'm not necessarily a military sci-fi reader, but the reason it did well for me was because I was steeped in reality. And I think that's really important. Whatever genre you're going to be writing, and you should be reading that genre, but you should also be reading real accounts of people who've lived that life. So if you're not reading nonfiction accounts of naval battles, if you're writing military sci-fi, you really need to do that, because there's an authenticity that pervades your work once you've taken in some of that information. That's really, really critical.
Yeah, I know myself. Haven't served in the armed forces. Great respect.
Same.
Have many family members who have served, both in my extended family and so forth. However, what I have found really useful are interviews with veterans on YouTube, getting to see firsthand. And there's, depending on which generation, like which war they fought in as well, you get a totally different story and a totally different outlook in terms of like their response to it and so forth. I found that helpful. But yeah, maybe if you have somebody you can talk to, or at the very least, watching documentaries, I agree. If you're in that genre and that's not part of your background, that's something that you need to do, because those veterans who read your stuff, they'll call you on it. They'll be like,
real fast.
Yeah, like, well,
my husband's a veteran, and he's not. There's like a lot of times if he's walking in uniform and somebody thanks him for his service, he actually gets really uncomfortable. It's one of those things he doesn't really like.
Sure.
And it's one of those things that like you don't know that if you aren't that in that life, you think, that's something that they, enjoy. But I think it's more of it, like he feels called out, or like it makes him a little uncomfortable. So yeah, he's still in the military. And yeah, it's kind of a interesting and
right. Well, yeah. And with sci-fi, you can maybe fudge it a little bit, because like different setting, in my case, totally imagined worlds and factions as well. I'm not dealing with the real world setting as a backdrop, so you can fudge some things here and there, as far as those things are concerned. But overall, the experience of being in the military is something that is sometimes hard to capture. I think. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but.
Well, I think it's really interesting what you mentioned is whatever we're dealing with is if you're writing a story from a perspective of somebody who's in a royal court, like they're at the top of the echelon socially, or you're doing a thing like the Firefly stuff where you're on the edges and the fringes of society, perspectives are going to be very different. Attitudes are very different. So if you're talking about like a World War II scenario where the combatants had horrible experiences, but they perceived their actions as salvation, like they did something really important. Or you go to a situation where a lot of vets in Vietnam felt that everything they did was futile, and when they came home, they were often derided. The whole experience is going to be a completely different thing. So it's really important to see those things and then think to yourself, okay, well, what is it I'm doing here, and how are people really going to act? Well, I read that one story about the Korean War that was really informative about that, or I read that story about courts in England, and now I know, okay. And you can see that when you go to the White Tower. I swear, I don't know if it's true, but I was in the White Tower in England looking at all the historical documents, and there's this piece of armor that's like the smallest piece of armor, and it was a small person. And then there's the biggest dude, and I was looking at it, I'm like, that looks like Tyrion Lannister and the Mountain That Rides. And I wondered if George R. R. Martin stood in that same space and came up with those characters then through true historical connection. I know that he had a lot of stuff he did like that. So steeping yourself in reality is great.
Yeah,
You're making me think about.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking a lot of it about the Game of Thrones is a lot about the War of the Roses, actually, from their time. Yeah. Sorry, Emma, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're making me think about the book I'm releasing at the end of the month, because I write high fantasy romantic subplot. My heroine, she's 400 years old, and she's a general, and she's at the point. My dad was a Vietnam vet, but she's at the point where she just she doesn't see any other way out. So it's making me think I should do one more pass. Visual resources, because as Jack mentioned, documentaries and things like that. For like the more, and we're talking military sci-fi, action adventure, are there like movies or audio visuals or anything, like if you need to see something, if you're not really a word person, you need to have like audio visual?
So yeah, this is huge. Documentaries of any kind that have reality to them are really important. And the one thing I can think of is it was really, really heartbreaking. And it shows how people really feel about war. And you can do this with just about any genre you're writing in. is the movie Restrepo. Restrepo is about the Kandahar Valley in Afghanistan, which was the most dangerous place in the world during the time this documentary was made. The filmmaker who made it, and I regret that I don't remember his name, but when you look it up, he actually died in a combat zone a few years later because he was in such dangerous areas making films. But there's this scene where the soldiers get ambushed and they get pinned down and they end up losing several soldiers. And you're right there. You see there's video footage of these people getting shot and killed. So it's not for the light of heart to watch this.
Yeah.
But there's this moment with the coffins when they're talking about the people that had died. You know, all the servicemen are there. They're back at base. They recovered the bodies. And the commander, and this dude is just huge. And he's like that classic puff chest hero. Like, he is the epitome of this commander. And this is the thing that a lot of military sci-fi misses, is they don't see this other side of it, where everyone leaves and he's only there with his sergeant and he breaks down sobbing. It is real. This actually happens. And so that's the thing, that those are those little subtle touches that you need to take in to understand, like, where is the pain? Where's the humanity? Where's the hurt?
Yeah. The emotional hook. Yeah.
This is a really good point. I got criticized by somebody, and you're going to get criticized. Like, somebody's not going to like it, but I got criticized by someone for the romance that was in my military sci-fi, because clearly they just didn't want to see that. But then I thought to myself, and I often get a lot more positive comments because of that, but it's like, what do you think kept these guys going in Vietnam? They had a picture of their girlfriend. They had a picture of their wife, you know?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think there's, like, I have romantic subplots in my military sci-fi. It's not romance because it doesn't abide by romance tropes. And so there's a difference there, but some folks just don't like it. But if that's a part of what you're doing, you know, I think you just got to kind of own it. And absolutely, there's a certain element of realism to that. Absolutely.
Are there any cliches or tropes you would steer clear of? Like, my heroine, she's an alcoholic, but my dad was. But I worry that that's kind of cliche. But like, it's my experience. I mean,
it seems like that's an authentic thing. Is because when you talk about addiction of any kind, you're talking about covering pain. So I think the most thing is, when you're going to have a trope like somebody's an alcoholic, you need to justify the pain that's underneath that. So when you talk about that, people will say, like, yeah, I have that pain too. And I end up watching cat videos online because I'm, like, so depressed about the world. You know, they'll be able to relate and connect. And it's the pain underneath that people will connect to. And I think a lot of times when we talk about a trope, it's because it's thinly layered. It's just like, yep, he's an alcoholic and look at how trashed he is. But they never really justify why.
Okay. Right. Like, for example, my main character, boy, I don't want to talk too much about my own stuff here, but basically, he is unfaithful to his wife. And the way I had originally written the story, you were supposed to find out later that, like, she was being unfaithful too, and she was kind of abusive, but you didn't get to see it until much later. And I've realized I actually needed to show that pain first, because everybody just hated my main character because they didn't understand that he was all the pain that sent him down that path. And not that that's even necessarily the greatest example, but if you have a character who has something like that, which is a personality flaw or something about them that is unlikable, like I think of House MD, the show, right?
100%, yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, well, he's a likable character, but he's an asshole.
But
and you kind of get introduced to his backstory over time, but you come to realize this is his pain. That's why his physical, actual pain is why he's an asshole. That's where a lot of that comes from. And he's jaded for all these reasons. And it makes you like his character because you see how that could be you as well. And if you don't do that work of showing the reader that, they're just going to think, like, your character is just an alcoholic because they're an alcoholic. There's no explanation. It doesn't have meaning behind it.
I just had this experience last week. I'm working on my current project is a sci-fi standalone that actually has some really dark themes. It involves human trafficking and sex work and a bunch of, like, really, really dark things. So that the villains in that story are horrible people. And I found it really difficult to write these scenes. And Leah and I talked a little bit. I was like, hey, I need to watch my state of mind while I write these guys. Yeah. But then I worked on the backstory, this moment of exposition where you find out why this guy is so horrible. And the darkness of it just got deeper and deeper, because I realized it's like, why do I feel so much darkness? Is because I'm connecting with this guy, because we can all see it's like when we've been wounded hard enough, sometimes we'll do some bad things. And so when you can connect with a villain, God, that villain just gets really authentic and good.
Yeah, absolutely. So Leah, you were wanted to talk about panels at conventions, and I think you mentioned this is maybe how you and Jason had originally met. So tell us here.
Yeah. Well, Jason he holds official rank, but he's trained in 10 martial arts, if I'm right, Jay?
Holds official rank in 8.
And
we have something in common.
Very cool. Yeah, just a couple different things in common here with the military sci-fi.
Oh, yeah. So. We can get into that. Go ahead, Leah.
Well, Jason loves to hate bad fight scenes, both in fiction and television and movies. And so he presents this panel called Fighting in Fiction, Writing a Knockout Scene.
Yep.
And I've been going to writing panels because I also want to be a writer. And I just go to learn whatever I can. And I met Jason there, and now we're married. Joke's on you. But panels is a really great way to connect with people. It's a really great way to legitimize why you're an author. Jason can talk about fighting. He can talk about story, like the hero's journey. He could talk about mindset and success. And we've actually went to, I think, our first Rose City. We did a panel on Sunday. It was the last panel of the last day. And we did our Fighting in Fiction. And then we had, he talked briefly about the book. But then people, I had to race them to get to our booth before the whole show closed down. And we did about 5 extra sales at the end of the day just from the panel.
5 or 6.
Yeah.
Awesome.
When we talk about stealing ourselves and becoming the best version of ourselves, doing panels is a great way to step into that imposter syndrome full force and face that part of yourself and that shadow self, as Jung talked about, and really realize that you probably do have some important things to share.
Yeah, I'm finally getting to the point where I feel confident to go on panels, even though I'm not published and I haven't been writing, but I know enough about like mindset and success and a little bit about story writing because me and Jason talk all the time. But it's terrifying, but it's also fun. But it's just meeting the people too. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
Now, have you thought about recording yourself talking about this? Because BookFunnel has short audio, and you can upload it as a short audio, and of course we would get it.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing a small Fighting in Fiction series, like on TikTok or YouTube. People have asked for it, and time is the biggest problem. Mostly, but I finally got all the equipment. I got a one of those ring lights that holds like my iPad so we can see what we're doing. We need to get some microphones and do that, but we've been talking about it for a long while now. So
yeah. So Jason, martial arts background. How'd you get into that? What martial arts have you trained in? Really, because I'm a mat rat. My parents own a martial arts school. I grew up in and around it. So
that's awesome.
Love that. Yeah. So I actually started, I didn't do anything. I had moved, by the time I was 27 years old, I moved 27 times. I had always been moving around. That's different houses sometimes in the same town, but a lot of times new towns every 2 years or so, new kid in school. A lot of neuroses for that. Probably one of the reasons I'm a writer is so I could sit off to the side and kind of try and connect with people without actually talking to them. But when I was 18 years old, I was down at the University of Oregon going to get my English degree, and this big dude just walked right through me on the sidewalk. I had to jump off the sidewalk, and he just gave me this dark look and walked through me. And I thought, I'm sick and tired of being afraid of people. So I went down and I started doing some Taekwondo, and somebody punched me in the face, and I was like, oh God, I'm not ready for that. It was horrible. So I ended up in Aikido, which was a great place for me to introduce myself. So I went through Aikido for several years. And then the guy showed up, and I had moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and a guy showed up, and he's like doing all this really weird stuff off the side of class. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, this is Jeet Kune Do. It's Bruce Lee's martial art. And I said to him, I'm like, wow, it's too bad there's no place to train here. And he's like, are you kidding me? There's this guy named Mike Brewer who is an Inosanto certified instructor. So this guy had learned Jeet Kune Do from Danny Inosanto, which means that he was one person away from Bruce Lee. So I got to learn Jeet Kune Do, 2 people from Bruce Lee. Actually, I've been to a couple seminars with Inosanto, so I was able to learn directly from the head of the system. And then his school closed down, so I ended up going, and I wasn't that interested in going back to Taekwondo, but I discovered that as it was Colorado Springs, where the Olympic Training Center is, the former head coach of the U.S. Olympic team had a school there. So I went and trained with Sang Lee for a couple of years, which was pretty cool. moved around, went through traditional karate, went through something called Goshin Jutsu, was kind of like what samurai learned when they weren't being honorable. Like if you jumped in
Right.
from behind, they're just going to like get after you. And then came around to Muay Thai, and then like everybody and their dog right now, which is fine. It's a fun sport. I do jiu-jitsu, so I came back around to jiu-jitsu because we get to listen to rock music while we warm up. But
that's true.
Kind of my path. And the thing that I realized was it's not so much whether I can defend myself or not. I've also learned a lot I can use with my writing, but I developed a lot of physical fitness, which was important. And I also developed the closest friendships I'll probably have with those people because you put yourself in very vulnerable situations with people.
Absolutely.
I have another request, and maybe Leah can help with this, but there's one niche in how to write fight scenes that I don't see done. It's how to write it realistically if your main character is a woman, even if she's a trained warrior, because I always feel like there's a line between badass and just super unrealistic.
Yep.
Absolutely. We see this all the time. Where people get into boxing brawls. A big dude and a smaller person will just start trading blows. And anytime you do that, the larger, stronger person's going to win unless the smaller person has speed, position, and some destructive ability, like focusing on the most sensitive areas, distractions, things that Bruce Lee, because Bruce Lee was very small, and yet he was extremely effective because he moved really fast and he targeted really well. And so somebody who's smaller needs speed and targeting, and they have that. That's the thing, is if somebody's really small, they've developed themselves physically. One of the things I encourage people a lot when they're writing fight scenes is to remember, you can't just teach someone a technique and they'll be effective. They have to build up their muscle structure to develop. If they're going to be really fast, they have to develop fast twitch muscle over several years. They have to develop and myelinate the parts of their brain that deal with reaction time and technique. And so it's not what I actually call it the last samurai syndrome, where you show up, train for a winter in some system, and then go take out people that have been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
I actually said that to Jonathan Mayberry at 20 books to 50K. And I said, hey, what do you think about this thing I call the last samurai syndrome? And he's got a 9th degree black belt. And he looked at me, his head turned to me, and he, somewhat jokingly, because he's a really nice dude, but he looked at me and kind of scowled and said, no. So, yeah, there's a lot of considerations.
Yeah. So my background, obviously, like I said, I grew up in martial arts. My parents met through martial arts at Iowa State University. So I grew up with it, did Taekwondo, Hapkido, which is kind of the Korean cousin of Aikido, and then trained in some Korean weapons randomly here and there, and then Systema, Russian martial art, which actually has there's kind of some folks in the Jeet Kune Do world that also do Systema, but more so in Kenpo. Kenpo has a lot of folks who come from Kenpo and go into Systema. And you said you're like 1 degree separated from Bruce Lee. I am 1 degree of separation from Richard Gere, who is not a martial arts master, but I trained with somebody who trained him for fight scenes in a movie. Anyway.
Very cool. Yeah.
So there's my
separation. Yeah.
The places martial arts will take you. But on that note, Emma, about women in fights, that's an awkward way to introduce it, but I've taught self-defense classes. I've taught martial arts. Most of my career prior to BookFunnel was teaching martial arts, mainly to kids, but also to adults. And there's a lot of it comes down to confidence and exposure. It's confidence and exposure. You have to have the exposure first to those scenarios to have the confidence. And then you also have to, just like writing, you have to learn to do it your own way. So when I was teaching self-defense to women, I'm a big 6'3", bearded guy. So for me, it's totally different. I'm the perfect attacker for them to train with, right? Because I'm the big imposing dude. And they realize, like, well, I can strike here, and even though you're bigger than me, that doesn't matter, right? The solar plexus is the big key. That's one of the first things a lot of people learn in self-defense.
I go after the eyeballs.
Yes,
eyeballs.
Right. It, like all of those. And then honestly, this is what an instructor had told me once. And I think it's something that's resonated into my writing as well. The biggest factor that determines your ability to fight is your willingness to fight.
Absolutely.
And so if you have the willingness to fight, it doesn't matter, man, woman, young, old, right? You can do something, right?
Yeah, the
Mhm.
statistics
Yep.
on
You know?
assault, when you talk about a woman being assaulted, if she just screams, scratches, and claws and fights back, the stats on it ending are very high
Mhm.
just from
Yeah.
fighting back, even
Yeah.
with no training.
Yeah. And if you're talking like in the context of war, because Emma, you've got a fantasy general. I'm imagining like Lord of the Rings, right?
She's
Would that be
Faye,
kind of?
yes. She's been
Yeah.
training for 300 years, so we
Yeah.
got the training
Yes.
down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The
Nice.
training and the exposure and
Yeah.
and all of that, I think is important because you need to know what fighting feels like. Like
Mhm.
the first time that you ever spar somebody, and Jason, I'm sure you know this, like
Oh, it was awful.
you're freaking out. You're
It's
like,
awful.
it's an experience. Like you're getting kicked and you have bruises and like, and then after you've done it for like, or like you get weird numbness and tingling in random places
Mhm.
because your body goes into, fight or flight and and you're not prepared for it. And then after you've done it for a while and you've been punched by a few Russian dudes, you're like, oh yeah, Tuesday.
It's all
But
right.
Tuesday,
how
no big deal.
important is skill? Because, like, if you have a female warrior who's been training for 300 years, but she's like 5'2" and 110 pounds, then you have a big ass dude who either has no training or has been training for 5 years, and it's like hand-to-hand combat. He corners her. I've always wondered, is it realistic she's going to win, especially if she doesn't have
Absolutely.
any weapons?
Yeah.
So
Skill.
you
Skill
shush.
makes- yeah.
You shush. So,
Me?
yes, you shush. So some of the most dangerous people are small women. I'm 5'3". I haven't trained that much. I've been wanting to train since I was really little, but I keep hearing that small women, if they're well trained, sometimes like Aikido and Jeet Kune Do are ideal for people who are small because we are quicker and harder to grab, and especially closer range. We're more able to get the center of the body. Jason's better at range. I'm better at being close up. So it's totally realistic. It just depends on what kind of fighting system and how much training. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, the size of someone is no matter how big a dude, they're still going to have squishy eyeballs and a gentle throat. Now, to address your question, this is really good. This actually happened last night. We had a guest instructor last night in jiu-jitsu who's the guy who runs the local judo club. And he is like, if you grab a hold of his gi, you are going on your butt. He will throw you down.
Yep.
Well, at the end of class, we're just going to do free sparring, right? So we walk out on the mat. I walk out near him, and all the other students move away from him. And I'm standing there beside him, and I'm like looking at the other guys like, thanks, guys. Appreciate you. And this guy is Jack. He's probably 5'8", but he's got the whole shoulder thing, and he's just really big. So we get down in a position because we're doing a situation where you start in a specific position. He was pretty helpless to deal with me. He was a lot stronger than me, but he didn't have jiu-jitsu technique. And so I submitted him several times, even though he was stronger than me. But if we were standing up, there would be nothing I could do to stay standing again. So it all depends on my strength and everything. So obviously a guy like that, I'm going to want to get to the ground with him as fast as possible. Where am I strong? Like, what am I good at? What is he good at?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you need to have a strategy around that. So obviously if your character has been in war for 300 years, they will have developed these strategies to deal with different scenarios, whether it's somebody bigger than them, multiple people, whatever it happens to be. Again, it comes down to exposure. And so that's where training is important. And so if you're talking about world building, that training aspect, it becomes really important. It's not just like a montage, like in a Rocky movie, right? It's like, it has to be intentional and you have to identify like, okay, what are the conditions that these soldiers or this character are going to have to face? And assuming I'm presenting them as being competent, what is the training that they should have therefore received and why? And so there's some reverse engineering you can kind of do there, but no, absolutely. We brought up judo, that there was a judo, and I did judo as a kid too, and I've rolled with some BJJ guys as well. And yeah, if you're on your feet with a judo guy,
You won't be.
just you won't be for long. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, in fact, it's funny. There was a video, kind of a predated really memes, but it was for a martial arts gathering, and this is at the Iowa State University. Whole bunch of different people who have studied under Master Yongchin Pak at the time, who was the head instructor there, and he taught judo and hapkido and taekwondo. And there was this video that some of the students had created, and it was Taekwondo versus Hapkido, I think. And it was like, who will win? And so they had the Taekwondo guy in his gear, and he's like kicking, and the Hapkido guy is trying to wrist lock him. And there's a referee, and I know this guy. I've trained with him, and I know when I'm seeing this, he's a judo player. And so he's the referee in his judo gi, and the Taekwondo guy and the Hapkido guy are going back and forth. And I think the Taekwondo guy kicks the Hapkido guy in the head or something. And then the referee steps up and throws him over his hip, and judo wins was the answer at the end. A random joke that only martial arts people will get and find funny. But anyway.
Love it.
Yes. Well, Jason, Leah,
Yes.
it was a blast having you guys on. We
Appreciate
tell
it.
everybody we need to have you back, but we have great guests, of course. So we do. I think there's a lot that we could talk about in further conversations. Really, I think the information you provided us on in-person sales, just going to cons and being in front of people, I think it's valuable for a lot of folks. I think there's some folks who may not have even considered this or written it off. And so I hope this conversation maybe helps some people think about it in a different light. Go ahead. I'll give you guys a moment here to shout out anything, your books, whatever you guys have going on here before we wrap things up.
Well, I haven't written anything yet, probably.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
I'm always like, write pros.
I need to.
So I'm currently working on a project that was really cool. When I had my emailing list, I had a big interruption in my writing life. But when I had been really hitting some steam, I had several hundred people on an emailing list, and I started writing a chapter with a question at the end, like, does the border agent let that guy through or not? Then I'd send it to my emailing group, and they voted what happens next. And it was cool because, it was really interesting because I didn't just get a yes or no vote. I actually got other thoughts like, oh, the old Russian woman. I thought that was super interesting. What's going to happen to her? And it's like, he's supposed to be a throwaway character. And then I developed about half of that book, and then things kind of fell apart. So that went and sat. So I'm actually working on finishing that traditionally, just writing it out. And I'm really excited about it. Like I said, it's super dark, but that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm really close to getting that done. So I'm really excited to have that standalone book out there.
Yeah. Awesome. And I imagine folks can find you if they can't come to one of the conventions that you guys happen to be at, they can find you on Amazon and find your books there as well. So
Jason-Bond.com. Don't forget the dash.
If you can see that.
Jason-Bond.com.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to include it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jason and Leah, for joining us today. It was a blast. Thank you, as always, to my co-hosts, Emma and Kelly. And thank you guys all for watching. We will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.